In this video, we're going to be talking about Texas Rebellion, the independence movement that goes on in Texas as it gains its independence from Mexico. Let's start off during the period of Spanish colonization in Texas. First of all, you're going to see the Spanish having a renewed interest in Texas in the early 1700s. Part of the reason for this is due to imperial competition. Right? Competition between the empires from Europe, including France and England. In the early 1700s, around 1720, you have the French actually taking over several Spanish settlements in eastern Texas. And so this is going to get a response from Spain. They are going to send a military force into eastern Texas to retake those areas. There isn't a big battle. France is willing to give up those areas. But this is a wake-up call for Spain, right? They realize that they have to populate Texas, they have to colonize Texas in order to maintain their grasp on that territory. Otherwise, some other imperial powers may come over and start settling that land. Okay, you have to remember at this time France has colonies in the area of Louisiana, not just the state of Louisiana, but the whole Louisiana territory surrounding the Mississippi River. Okay, so that's right there on the eastern borders of Texas, and so that's why you have French military forces coming into Texas trying to gain that territory from Spain, and this was happening during a period of war between France and Spain. Okay, and England also is a threat. You have England with its 13 colonies on the East Coast in North America, right? And so maybe they might try to expand into the area of Texas as well. Later on, you're going to see an effort to colonize Texas to create a buffer zone for the expanding United States after the U.S. gains its independence from Great Britain. Okay, so Texas can act as a buffer zone for Americans who may be trying to come and settle in that area so that they don't approach the more populated areas of Mexico. Also, Texas colonization could act as a buffer zone for Native American groups that were raiding into northern Mexico, such as the Eastern Comanches or the Eastern Apaches. Okay, these are two different groups that were conducting a number of raids in Texas, but also in northern Mexico. And so they were really causing a lot of trouble for ranchers in northern Mexico. So horses, cattle, all these could be stolen from these tribes who were conducting raids, people getting killed, and so there was a lot of turmoil there. And so if Spain could set up a colony in Texas, then they could act as a buffer zone so that the Comanches and Apaches wouldn't raid deeper into northern Mexico. Okay, so these are all reasons why you start to see an effort by Spain to colonize Texas. Now, the most lucrative industry that Texas is going to have is going to be the ranching industry. All right, this is going to be the big profit maker for Spain there in Texas. And the ranching industry starts off early in the 1700s. Actually, that same military expedition that was sent from northern Mexico into Texas to push out the French in eastern Texas, they also brought a number of sheep and horses with them. And they left them there to be tended by the missions, because there were several missions in Texas at the time. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So early on, with Spanish expeditions heading into Texas, they're bringing a large number of sheep and horses with them, and they leave them there so that they can reproduce. And the missions that are located there, particularly the missions at San Antonio and La Bahia, they'll be taking care of them as they naturally reproduce, and so you'll have a lot of heads of livestock there in Texas. Okay, eventually, as the ranching industry begins to grow, you're going to have more and more demand for their products. Right, they'll start to raise beef as well, and so some of this demand is going to be coming from the mining towns in northern Mexico. Okay, we've talked about the mining towns before and their relationship, their trade relationship with New Mexico, right? That was one of the main outlets for trade for New Mexico. Well, Texas is also going to have trade with northern Mexico, the mining towns, because those miners are going to want to have access to beef. And so the cattle industry in Texas is going to supply that beef for them. Also, during the American Civil War, there's also going to be a major demand for beef coming out of Texas, and the ranching industry industry there will supply and meet that demand. So yes, the ranching industry in Texas is beginning to grow, and during these early years, the ranching industry is under the control of the missions, okay? Just like in California, where you have religious missions, which are being controlled by the priests, you also have missions in Texas, okay, that are trying also to assimilate and Christianize the native people of Texas. Okay, and they'll have mixed results there. You know, they'll have some native people join the missions and convert to Christianity, while others may be there on a temporary basis. But you have these missions, especially at San Antonio and La Bahia, that are going to be controlling large amounts of land. Okay, eventually the missions will control over 1 million acres of land, which will be used for grazing for their livestock. Okay, so obviously they're planning on supplying a lot of beef and mutton for northern Mexico and whoever else is willing to buy from them. Okay, so this is the big profit-making industry, the ranching industry in Texas. Now, during this early period, yes, the missions are in control of the ranching industry, but eventually they will lose that control. Okay, and this is going to be through something called secularization, a process that begins in 1793 when the Spanish are still in control of New Spain, but you're going to see secularization actually continue on through the Mexican period as well, and by the time you get to about 1824, secularization will be complete. So what is secularization? What is this process? Well, basically, you have all of those lands that were once controlled by the missions, by the church, right? Well, those lands will eventually be privatized and sold to settlers, okay, to Mexican settlers. And so that's secularization, the process of taking the missions, and instead of those being church holdings, those land holdings, they're going to be sold to Mexican settlers, okay? So over 1 million acres of land. And one of the reasons for this is because once these lands are sold to settlers and privatized, then they can be taxed by the Spanish government. Okay, so that's why you see the process of secularization being started there in Texas. All right, because after you sell those lands off to individual settlers, they're going to be involved in ranching as well, and then they could get taxed by the government. So it becomes another source of income, okay, for the Spanish government and later on for the Mexican government. Okay, so eventually those mission lands will be sold to a number of different settlers. Even during the period where the missions controlled those lands and the ranching industry, you had a number of settlers already living on those lands, and they were actually paid for their labor. Okay, so instead of paying them for their labor and having them live on those mission lands, then you could actually just sell the lands to them and then tax them. Okay, and you could then tax them and make a profit for the state. Some income, some revenue for the state by taxing these settlers who will eventually own those mission lands. Okay, they're in Texas. So it makes sense why the government would want to pursue secularization there in Texas. So that process begins in 1793 and will continue on until the missions had been fully secularized by 1824.